The email glowed on my laptop screen, casting a soft blue light across my luxurious penthouse living room. I stared at the words, unable to believe what I was reading. Natalie, I heard about your recent property acquisition. Quite surprised, considering your background. Perhaps we could meet for coffee? Dad? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling with a mixture of rage and vindication. My name is Natalie Rhodes. I'm 31 years old. And this is the story of how I went from being told I'd never amount to anything to owning the building where my father lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I stood up from my custom Italian leather sofa and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the glittering Seattle skyline. Somewhere, 17 floors below, my father was probably sitting in his modest two-bedroom apartment, the one he'd been so proud of when he downsized after the divorce. The same father who'd laughed in my face when I told him I wanted to study real estate development instead of following his footsteps into corporate law. Property development isn't for people like us, Natalie, he'd said dismissively over dinner the night before my college graduation. It's for people with connections, with old money. Know your place. He'd slid a business card across the table for his friend's law firm, where he'd already arranged an entry-level position for me. This is your future. Be practical. I never showed up for that job interview. Instead, I took the $5,000 graduation money from my grandmother and rented a tiny studio apartment in the roughest part of the city. For 3 years, I worked 2 jobs, as a barista during the day and a restaurant hostess at night, while taking online courses in real estate finance and urban development. My few friends thought I was crazy, sacrificing my social life for a dream my own father said was impossible. The memory of those early days still burned. The nights I'd come home exhausted, my feet swollen from standing for 14 hours straight. The mornings I'd wake up to the sound of arguments and police sirens outside my window. The weekends spent studying instead of partying. The constant gnawing fear that maybe my father was right. Maybe I was chasing an impossible dream. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my photo gallery until I found the picture from 6 years ago. Me standing in front of a dilapidated duplex, holding up a set of keys with a smile so wide it hurt my cheeks. My first property purchase, a foreclosure so damaged most investors wouldn't touch it. I'd scraped together every penny, maxed out a high-interest loan, and convinced a reluctant bank officer to take a chance on me. That duplex had nearly broken me. I spent every free moment for months tearing out rotted floorboards, learning to fix plumbing on YouTube, painting until my hands cramped, all while my father's voice echoed in my head. Property isn't for people like us. I rented out one unit and lived in the other, putting every cent of profit back into improvements. 12 months later, I sold it for double what I'd paid and used the money to buy 2 more distressed properties. My phone buzzed with a new text message. It was from my father again. I notice you haven't responded to my email. Perhaps you're busy with your investment. Coffee tomorrow? I placed the phone face down on the marble countertop without replying. The irony wasn't lost on me that he now lived in a building I had purchased last month through my holding company. He had no idea that his rent checks were being processed by my property management firm. I walked into my home office, where a whiteboard covered the entire wall. On it was a complex network of property acquisitions, renovation schedules, and profit projections. In 7 years, I had gone from that single rundown duplex to a portfolio of 38 properties across the city, including 3 multi-unit buildings. The centerpiece of my empire was this luxury high-rise, where I'd purchased the penthouse after the building's previous owner faced bankruptcy. The decision to buy this particular building hadn't been strictly business. I'd known for months that my father lived here, having downsized after my mother finally left him 3 years ago. She'd grown tired of his condescension, his need to control everything and everyone around him. We'd reconnected after their split, and she was now living her best life in Arizona with a kind, retired teacher who treated her like a queen. I poured myself a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon, a $300 bottle from the same vineyard my father had once told me I wouldn't appreciate because I lacked sophistication, and returned to the window. The night was clear, the city lights reflecting on Elliott Bay like scattered diamonds. From this height, I could see the first property I'd ever purchased, now unrecognizable after the extensive renovations done by its new owners. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My assistant had left a stack of acquisition proposals on my desk earlier that day. Tomorrow I would review them and decide which properties to add to my growing empire. But tonight, I allowed myself to savor this moment. The moment when David Samuel Rhodes, the man who had belittled my dreams and tried to force me into a life I never wanted, was unknowingly living in a building owned by his disappointment of a daughter. I still remembered the look on his face at my mother's 50th birthday party 4 years ago, when I'd arrived in a custom-tailored suit and handed her the keys to a beachfront condo, a gift from her daughter, the successful property developer. "It must be nice," he'd said with that familiar condescending smile, "playing with buildings like they're dollhouses. When are you going to grow up and get a real career?" Even then, with 10 properties in my portfolio and a net worth that had just crossed into 7 figures, he couldn't acknowledge my success. In his mind, I was still the impractical dreamer who needed his guidance to find her place in the world. His place for me, not mine. I hadn't invited him to the housewarming party I'd thrown when I moved into this penthouse 6 weeks ago. Most of Seattle's real estate elite had attended, the same people who had ignored my calls when I was starting out. Now they sought my insights, valued my opinion, offered me partnerships. The local business journal had featured me in their 40 under 40 inches issue last year. The property prodigy. They'd called me. My phone buzzed again. A text from my mother. "Dad mentioned he's trying to meet with you. Please be kind, honey. He's struggling." I smiled slightly. Even after everything, she still tried to broker peace between us. What she didn't understand was that I didn't hate my father. I had moved beyond hate years ago. What I felt now was something closer to pity, mixed with a lingering desire for acknowledgement that I knew would never come. I opened my laptop and pulled up the building's security system. With a few clicks, I accessed the feed from the lobby cameras, and there he was. My father, returning from his evening walk, nodding curtly at the doorman as he always did. He looked older than his 62 years, his shoulders slightly stooped, his once commanding presence diminished. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of something like sadness. Then I remembered the day I'd graduated with honors from my online business program. I'd invited him, hoping that seeing the ceremony might change his mind about my choices. He'd declined, saying he had an important golf game that couldn't be rescheduled. Later I learned from my mother that there had been no golf game. He simply couldn't bear to watch me celebrate a path he hadn't chosen for me. I closed the laptop and walked to my kitchen, a chef's dream of stainless steel and Italian marble. As I prepared a simple dinner, skills I'd learned during those lean years when eating out wasn't an option, I thought about how to respond to his request for coffee. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely, to deny him the satisfaction of my attention. Another part wanted to meet him in my most expensive outfit, dripping with the success he'd said I'd never achieve. But neither approach felt right. This wasn't about showing off or seeking revenge. This was about claiming my narrative, about standing in my truth, about finally being seen, not as his disappointing daughter, but as Natalie Rhodes, the woman who had built an empire from nothing but determination and grit. My journey hadn't been without failures. There was the commercial property I'd invested in too hastily, losing nearly a year's profits when the renovation went catastrophically over budget. The partnership with a seemingly reputable developer, who turned out to be cutting corners on building safety. The 3 consecutive months during the economic downturn when I'd wondered if everything I'd built would collapse like a house of cards. But through it all, I'd persisted. When banks turned me down, I found private investors. When contractors quit, I learned to do the work myself. When city regulations created obstacles, I attended every council meeting until I understood the system well enough to navigate it successfully. Each barrier had become a lesson, each setback a stepping stone. The most valuable skill I developed wasn't in finance or construction or negotiation, though I'd mastered all three. It was resilience, the ability to hear no and try again, to fail and get back up, to be dismissed and return with an even better proposal. In a strange way, I had my father to thank for that. His constant dismissal of my dreams had trained me to function in a world that often told women like me that we didn't belong. I plated my dinner, a perfectly seared salmon with roasted vegetables, and sat at my dining table, which offered another spectacular view of the city. From here I could see the university, where I'd completed my undergraduate degree before my father's disapproval had driven me to change course. I wondered sometimes what my life would have been like if I'd taken that law firm job, if I'd surrendered to his vision for me. Would I be a partner by now, working 80-hour weeks in a field that never interested me? Would I have married the type of man my father approved of, someone from his club, with the right background and connections? Would I be living in a nice but modest home in the suburbs, taking 2 weeks of vacation a year, waiting for retirement to finally start living? The thought made me shudder. Success wasn't just about the money or the properties or the prestigious address. It was about waking up every morning, excited about the day ahead. About building something meaningful, something that would outlast me. About proving to myself, not to my father, not anymore, that I could create the life I wanted on my terms. My phone buzzed once more. Another text from my father. I see you've read my messages. Your silence speaks volumes, as always. I could almost hear the familiar disappointed tone, the subtle accusation. Some things never changed. But I had changed. The Natalie who desperately sought his approval no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who had learned to validate herself, who had built her worth from the ground up, just like her properties. I finished my dinner and walked back to the window, gazing down at the city that had become my canvas. Each lighted window represented someone's home, someone's safe space in the world. Some of those homes existed because I had seen potential where others saw only decay. I had transformed neglected buildings into communities, had created value where there had been abandonment. Tomorrow I would decide whether to meet with my father. Tonight I would sleep soundly in the home I had earned, 17 floors above the man who said I never would. As I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I looked nothing like the exhausted, uncertain young woman who had started this journey nearly a decade ago. My eyes held confidence now. My posture spoke of self-assurance. I had become the person I always knew I could be, despite everyone who said otherwise. Perhaps that was the greatest achievement of all. Not the properties or the wealth or the status, but the unshakable belief in myself that no one, not even David Samuel Rhodes, could ever take away from me again. In real estate, they say the 3 most important factors are location, location, location. But in life, I had learned that the 3 most important factors are belief, persistence, and courage. Without those, no amount of advantageous positioning matters. I slipped between the Egyptian cotton sheets of my king-sized bed and closed my eyes, allowing the gentle hum of the city below to lull me toward sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new decisions, including what to do about the man who had once been the center of my universe, now reduced to a tenant in a building I owned. But whatever I decided, I would do it from a place of strength, not bitterness. Because true success isn't measured by revenge or vindication. It's measured by the person you become along the way. And I had become someone I was proud of. Someone who built things up instead of tearing them down. Someone who created opportunities instead of limiting them. Someone who, despite being told she didn't belong in the world of property development, now owned a significant piece of the Seattle skyline, including the building where my father lived, unaware that every month, his rent check helped fund the empire he said I would never build. Morning sunlight streamed through my bedroom windows, gradually pulling me from sleep. I hadn't set an alarm, one of the luxuries of being your own boss. My phone displayed several notifications, including another message from my father. I'll be at Westlake Cafe at 10. I hope to see you there. No question, just an assumption that I would appear at his command, like I always had before. I stretched and walked to the kitchen to make coffee, contemplating what to do. Meeting him meant reopening old wounds, subjecting myself to his judgment once more. Not meeting him meant continuing the silence that had defined our relationship for years. Neither option felt satisfying. As my Italian espresso machine hummed to life, I scrolled through my schedule for the day: a meeting with contractors about the historic building I was renovating downtown, lunch with a potential investor, a conference call with my property managers about tenant issues. The rhythm of a life I had built for myself, piece by piece, deal by deal. The espresso finished brewing, and I carried my cup to the balcony, where the morning air was crisp and clear. Below me, Seattle was already buzzing with activity: people hurrying to jobs, delivery trucks navigating narrow streets, tourists wandering with coffee cups in hand. Somewhere down there, my father was probably preparing for our meeting, rehearsing whatever speech he'd planned to deliver. I remembered the first time I'd defied him openly. I was 23, and I'd just used my savings to put a deposit on that first duplex. When I told him about it over dinner, expecting at least grudging support, he'd laughed. Not a kind laugh, but the dismissive chuckle he reserved for ideas he found particularly absurd. A duplex? In that neighborhood? Natalie, you might as well throw your money in Elliott Bay. He'd sipped his wine, shaking his head. When this inevitable failure happens, don't come asking for help. I won't bail you out of your little real estate experiment. That night, I'd cried in my car before driving back to my studio apartment. Not because I doubted my decision, but because I realized in that moment that I would never have the father I needed, one who believed in me, who supported my dreams even if they differed from his own. I finished my espresso and returned inside to get dressed. If I was going to meet him, I would do it on my terms. I chose a simple but elegant outfit: tailored black pants, a cream silk blouse, and a structured blazer that subtly displayed the success I had achieved without screaming for attention. Professional, confident, untouchable. As I applied minimal makeup, I thought about what I wanted from this interaction. Validation? That ship had sailed years ago. An apology? Unlikely from a man who had never admitted being wrong about anything in his life. Closure? Perhaps that was it. Not an ending, necessarily, but a recalibration of our relationship based on who we both were now, not who we had been. I took the private elevator down to the garage level, where my Tesla waited. Another small victory. I remembered how my father had scoffed when I told him I wanted to buy an electric vehicle 5 years ago. A novelty, he'd called it. They'll never replace real cars. Now he drove a hybrid, though I doubted he'd ever acknowledge the shift in his thinking. The drive to Westlake Cafe took only 15 minutes. I arrived 5 minutes before 10, parked, and sat in my car for a moment, gathering my thoughts. Through the cafe window, I could see him already seated at a corner table, checking his watch. Always early, always judging those who weren't. I took a deep breath and entered the cafe. The familiar scent of coffee and pastries filled the air as I made my way to his table. He stood when he saw me, a reflexive politeness that had nothing to do with genuine respect. "Natalie," he said, his voice formal. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Dad," I replied, taking the seat opposite him. Up close, the changes in him were more apparent. His hair had gone completely gray, and new lines etched his face. His suit, while still expensive, hung slightly loose on his frame. Let him work for this conversation, I thought. Let him bridge the chasm he had created. He cleared his throat. "I was surprised to learn about your recent purchase. The Westlake Heights building is quite an acquisition." I sipped my coffee, which had arrived promptly. It was a sound investment decision. The previous owner had mismanaged it considerably. "So I've noticed," he said dryly. "The maintenance has improved significantly in the past month." A small smile played at the corner of my mouth. "I'm glad to hear that. Tenant satisfaction is a priority for my company." His eyes narrowed slightly. "How long have you known I lived there?" "Since before the purchase," I admitted. There was no point in pretending otherwise. Though that wasn't the primary factor in my decision. He nodded slowly, processing this information. "I see. And did you also know that your acquisition has made my rent increase by 15% upon renewal next month? Ah, so that was it. Not a desire to reconnect, not curiosity about my life, but a complaint about how my business decisions had affected his comfort. Some things truly never changed. The increases were across the board, I explained calmly. The building had been undervalued for years. The new rates simply reflect market reality. Market reality, he repeated, a familiar edge creeping into his voice. Is that what you call it when you price out long-term residents? I set my cup down carefully. We offered existing tenants a smaller increase than new ones, 10% instead of 20%. And we're investing substantially in building improvements. The value proposition remains excellent. He leaned back, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You sound like... well, like someone who knows what they're talking about. I do know what I'm talking about, I replied evenly. I've been doing this professionally for nearly a decade. A silence fell between us, filled only by the ambient noise of the cafe, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversations at other tables, the gentle clatter of cups and plates. I waited, refusing to be the one to break it. This was his meeting, his agenda. Let him direct it. Finally, he spoke again. Your mother tells me you own quite a few properties now. 38 at last count, I said. Though we're closing on 3 more next week? He nodded, a flicker of something. Surprise? Respect? Crossing his face before disappearing behind his usual impassive mask. And you manage all of these yourself? I have a team, I explained. Good people who share my vision for responsible development. We don't just buy properties. We improve them. We invest in the neighborhoods around them. We create communities where people want to live. For a moment, he looked almost impressed. Then his expression shifted back to the skeptical look I knew so well. It's a volatile market. What happens when the bubble bursts again? I had prepared for this question, had answered it in investor meetings, in interviews, in late-night moments of my own doubt. We're diversified across property types and neighborhoods. We maintain healthy cash reserves. We're conservative with leveraging. And we invest in quality that maintains value even in downturns. I met his gaze directly. I've weathered one recession already. I'm prepared for the next. He sipped his coffee, considering my answer. Your grandfather would have approved, he said finally. He always said real estate was the only thing they couldn't make more of. The mention of my grandfather, his father, surprised me. A successful banker who had died when I was 12. He had been the one person my father had truly respected. I didn't know he said that. Many times. A faint smile touched my father's lips. He wanted to invest in property himself, but my mother wouldn't hear of it. Too risky, she said. This was new information, a glimpse into a family dynamic I'd never been privy to. So you followed her path instead. He nodded. Law was safe. Respectable. Predictable. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. I wanted the same I'm selling my law practice, he said after a moment. Retiring finally. Congratulations, I said, genuinely surprised. My father had always defined himself by his work. I couldn't imagine him without it. Thank you. He fidgeted with his coffee cup. The thing is, I'm not entirely sure what comes next. Your mother has her new life. My colleagues are either still working or moved to warmer climates. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. I find myself at a crossroads, Natalie. I waited, sensing there was more. I've been watching what you've built, he continued. From a distance, of course. Your mother keeps me informed. And I've seen the articles, the awards, the buildings you've transformed. He took a deep breath. I was wrong about you. The words hung in the air between us, words I had never expected to hear from his lips. I remained silent, afraid that if I spoke, the moment would shatter. I was wrong, he repeated more firmly this time. About your capabilities, about this path you chose, about many things. He straightened his shoulders. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I recognize what you've accomplished, against my expectations and despite my lack of support. I studied his face, looking for the familiar signs of manipulation or condescension. But all I saw was a tired man trying, perhaps for the first time, to reach across the divide he had created. "Thank you for saying that," I said finally. "It means something to hear it." He nodded, a quick, jerky movement. "I've also been thinking about your grandfather's building. The one downtown that's been sitting empty for years. I inherited it, as you know, but never knew what to do with it. It's not much. 6 stories, needs work, but it has potential, I think, in the right hands." I knew the building he meant. A beautiful Art Deco structure from the 1930s that had housed my grandfather's bank until it was merged with a larger institution. It had historical value, but would need significant investment to be viable again. "Are you thinking of selling it?" I asked cautiously. "I'm thinking of asking for your professional opinion," he replied, "as someone who knows what they're talking about." The words were an echo of our earlier exchange, but this time without the edge of sarcasm. A genuine request for my expertise. "I'd be happy to take a look," I said, "though I should disclose that if it has potential, I might be interested in acquiring it myself." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I would expect nothing less. You're a businesswoman after all." "Yes," I agreed. "I am." He glanced at his watch. An old habit I remembered from childhood dinners cut short by work emergencies. "I have an appointment with my accountant at 11. But perhaps we could continue this conversation another time? Maybe you could come by the building next week." I nodded, surprised by my willingness to extend this tentative reconnection. "Text me the details. I'll make time." He stood, placing money on the table to cover our coffees despite my silent gesture toward my own wallet. Some battles weren't worth fighting, I decided. "Natalie," he said as I rose to leave. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've built. Not just the properties. The life." I met his gaze, searching for the sincerity in his words. It seemed genuine, though part of me, the wounded daughter who had craved this acknowledgement for years, remained wary of hoping too much. "Thank you," I said simply. "That does matter." As I walked back to my car, I felt lighter somehow, as if a weight I had carried for so long had shifted slightly. Not disappeared. Our history was too complex for that, but changed in a way that made it less burdensome. My phone buzzed with a message from my assistant, reminding me about the contractor meeting in an hour. Real life intruding on this moment of personal reckoning. But that was fitting in a way. The empire I had built, the success I had achieved, it continued regardless of my father's recognition or lack thereof. I had long ago stopped needing his approval to validate my choices. And yet, there was something healing about finally receiving it, even in this limited form. Not because it changed who I was or what I had accomplished, but because it suggested that perhaps he was changing, evolving in his understanding of me and of himself. As I drove toward my next appointment, I thought about his mention of my grandfather's building, a structure with history, with meaning beyond its commercial value. The possibility of transforming it into something new while honoring its past held a symbolism that wasn't lost on me. Perhaps that was what this tentative reconnection with my father offered as well. Not a complete rebuilding of what had been broken, but a thoughtful renovation that acknowledged the damage while creating something different, something that might still have value. I smiled at the real estate metaphor my mind had immediately constructed. Once a developer, always a developer, I supposed. Seeing potential where others saw only decay was both my profession and, increasingly, my personal philosophy. By the time I reached the construction site for my downtown project, I had mentally filed away the meeting with my father and shifted into business mode. The contractors were waiting, hard hats in hand, ready to walk me through the progress and challenges of the historic renovation. As I donned my own hard hat and steel-toed boots, always kept in the trunk of my car for impromptu site visits, I focused on the task at hand. The past would always be there, with its complications and contradictions. But the future, embodied in these half-finished spaces, these walls being stripped back to reveal their original beauty, these careful modernizations that respected history while embracing progress, that was where my energy belonged. The next few hours passed in a blur of decisions and discussions. Exposed brick or refinished plaster, original windows with new glass or historically accurate replacements. How to incorporate modern HVAC systems without compromising architectural integrity. Each choice a balance between preservation and practicality, between honoring the past and serving the future. It wasn't until I was back in my car, heading toward my lunch meeting, that I allowed myself to reflect again on the morning's encounter. My father had been wrong about me, about my abilities and my choices. He had finally acknowledged that fact. But the truth was, it no longer defined me either way. I had built my success not to prove him wrong, but to prove myself right. And that made all the difference. As I navigated through midday traffic, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror. The confident, accomplished woman looking back at me had been forged not just by success, but by the struggle to achieve it. By the challenges and setbacks, the doubts and fears, the moments of near failure and spectacular comeback. My father's words, "I was wrong about you," were satisfying to hear after all these years. But the most important validation had come long before, from within myself. From the day I stood in front of that first dilapidated duplex and saw not what it was, but what it could become. Just as I had looked at my own life and seen not the limitations others imposed, but the possibilities I could create. That vision, that ability to see beyond present circumstances to future potential, was my true inheritance. And unlike the building my father now offered, it was one I had claimed for myself, without anyone's permission or approval. I pulled into the restaurant parking lot, ready to meet the investor who wanted to partner on my next major project. This conversation would be different from the one with my father, focused on numbers and projections, strategies and returns. But underlying it would be the same fundamental truth that had guided my journey from the beginning, that the most valuable property you will ever develop is the foundation of your own self-belief, and that, unlike real estate, truly is something they cannot make any more of. The week following my coffee meeting with my father passed in a whirlwind of activity. 3 property closings, a zoning board hearing for my latest project, and endless meetings with contractors, designers, and potential investors. I'd almost forgotten about his invitation to view my grandfather's building until his text arrived on Friday afternoon. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. at 1275 Harrison Street? I'll bring the keys." I texted back a simple "I'll be there" and added it to my calendar. Saturday mornings were usually reserved for my personal ritual, a long run along the waterfront, followed by a quiet breakfast at my favorite local cafe, where I'd sketch property ideas in a leather-bound notebook. But some rituals could be adjusted for more important priorities. That night, I found myself pulling out old family photo albums, something I hadn't done in years. There, in faded photographs, was my grandfather standing proudly in front of his bank building, the same one I would be visiting tomorrow. In one picture, he held the hand of a small boy in a suit too formal for his age. My father, around 7 years old, looking uncomfortable, but determined to stand tall beside the imposing figure of his father. Another photo showed my grandfather behind his massive oak desk, the wood gleaming under the bank's ornate lighting fixtures. I remembered visiting that office as a child, being lifted onto his lap as he showed me the building plans for the bank's expansion. "Always build with the future in mind, Natalie," he'd told me, his voice deep and certain. "But never forget to honor what came before." I'd forgotten that memory until now. Had that early exposure to architectural drawings and property discussions planted the seed for my eventual career path? Had I been following in my grandfather's footsteps all along, without even realizing it? The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Perfect Seattle fall weather, I dressed casually but professionally in dark jeans, boots, and a tailored blazer. For building inspections, I needed to be prepared to climb into crawl spaces or up to rooftops, while still looking put together enough to command respect. I arrived at Harrison Street precisely at 10 a.m. The building stood like a sentinel from another era, 6 stories of Art Deco elegance, with intricate stonework around the windows and geometric patterns adorning the facade. Even in its current neglected state, its beauty was undeniable. My father was already there, standing on the sidewalk, keys in hand. He wore casual clothes, something I rarely saw, and looked almost nervous. "Good morning," I said as I approached. "Natalie." He nodded, then gestured toward the building. "It's been vacant for nearly 5 years now. The last tenant was a law firm that occupied the top 2 floors, but they moved to a newer building downtown. Have you had it inspected recently?" I asked, shifting immediately into professional mode. "Basic maintenance inspections only. The systems are functioning but outdated. I've kept the heat at minimum levels to prevent damage. But otherwise..." He trailed off with a shrug. He unlocked the massive front door, and we stepped into a lobby that took my breath away. Despite years of neglect, the space retained its grandeur. Marble floors, bronze fixtures, a sweeping staircase that curved gracefully to the 2nd floor. The centerpiece was a magnificent Art Deco chandelier, its crystals dusty but intact. Grandfather commissioned that chandelier from a French designer in 1935, my father said, following my gaze upward. It was shipped in pieces and assembled on site. During the war, he covered it completely, afraid the glass would shatter during air raid drills. I moved slowly through the lobby, taking in every detail: the marble counters where tellers once stood, the ornate elevator doors decorated with bronze sunbursts, the detailed plasterwork on the ceiling. Behind the neglect and dust, I could see the bones of something extraordinary. The upper floors were renovated in the 70s. My father continued as we entered the elevator. Not sympathetically, I'm afraid. Dropped ceilings, fluorescent lighting, that sort of thing. The elevator creaked its way upward, stopping at the 2nd floor. As promised, the space had been modernized badly. The elegant proportions hidden behind generic office partitions, the large windows partially blocked by air conditioning units. "This is painful to see," I murmured, running my hand along a section of wall where original wood paneling had been covered with textured wallpaper. "You should have seen what they wanted to do in the 80s, my father replied with a grimace. "I had to fight to keep the exterior intact. They wanted to cover the stonework with metal panels to make it look contemporary." I looked at him with new appreciation. "You stopped that?" He nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. "Your grandfather made me promise to protect the building. I couldn't save the interiors from tenants, renovations, but I drew the line at destroying the facade." We continued our tour through the building, floor by floor. Behind the unfortunate renovations, the structure remained solid. The top floor, which had once housed my grandfather's executive offices, retained some original features: wood paneling, built-in bookshelves, even a hidden wet bar behind a pivoting panel. He installed that during Prohibition, my father explained with a rare smile. Technically illegal, but as he told me later, banking is built on relationships, and relationships are sometimes built on a good scotch. I laughed, trying to reconcile this story with— He was different in this building, more alive somehow. After he sold the bank and retired, something in him dimmed. I think he regretted letting it go. We made our way to the roof, where an unexpected terrace offered stunning views of the city. Mount Rainier loomed in the distance, its snow-capped peak gleaming in the morning sun. "I had no idea this was up here," I said, walking to the edge where an iron railing provided safety without obstructing the view. "Your grandfather used to host summer parties here. Live jazz, champagne, the works. The city's elite would dress in their finest to sip cocktails and dance under the stars." He pointed to rusted fittings along the perimeter. String lights hung there, and a canopy could be erected in case of rain. I closed my eyes briefly, imagining the scene, the music, the laughter, the city spread out below like a carpet of lights. When I opened them again, I saw not what was, but what could be. The vision formed so clearly it was almost tangible, restored to its original glory, but repurposed for modern use. Retail on the ground floor, professional offices in the middle, and the top floor and roof transformed into an event space that honored its Jazz Age history. "I want it," I said simply, turning to face my father. He raised an eyebrow. "Just like that? No inspection? No cost analysis?" "I'll do all that, of course. But yes, just like that." I gestured around us. "This building has a soul, Dad. It deserves to be brought back to life, not torn down for some glass tower." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Your grandfather would have agreed with you." He hesitated before adding, "I've had offers, you know, developers who want the land, not the building. They'd demolish it without a second thought." "I won't," I promised. "I'll restore it, honor its history while giving it a new purpose. What's your asking price?" He named a figure that was, surprisingly, below market value for the location, even considering the renovation costs I'd incur. "That's generous," I said cautiously. "It's fair," he corrected, "to someone who will preserve what matters." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of this unexpected alliance settling between us. This wasn't just a business transaction. It was a transfer of legacy, a passing of the torch. "There's something else you should see," he said finally, leading me back downstairs to the main floor. Behind the former teller counter, he unlocked a heavy door that revealed a massive vault. The circular door, several feet thick, stood open, revealing not a cash repository but a room lined with filing cabinets and storage boxes. "What is all this?" I asked, stepping inside. The air was cool and dry, preserved by systems designed to protect currency and valuables. "The building's history," he replied. "Architectural drawings, photographs, even the original construction contracts. Your grandfather kept everything, and I've added to it over the years. Newspaper clippings, maintenance records, stories from long-time employees." I opened the nearest box and found carefully preserved blueprints. The paper now yellowed, but the drawings still crisp and clear. Another contained photographs documenting the construction process, from groundbreaking to grand opening. A third held letters, correspondence between my grandfather and the architects, the craftsmen, the artists who had contributed to the building's creation. This is, I struggled to find the right word, incredible, a complete historical record. "I thought you'd appreciate it," he said quietly. "Most developers wouldn't care." "I'm not most developers." I looked up from the documents I'd been examining. "This changes things, Dad. With these resources, I could apply for historical designation, maybe qualify for preservation tax credits. It would make the restoration financially viable while ensuring the building's protection for generations." He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." We spent the next hour exploring the vault's contents, my father explaining the significance of various items, sharing stories I'd never heard about my grandfather and the building that had been his pride and joy. For the first time in my adult life, I felt a true connection. I hesitated, then added, "Would you be willing to consult on the restoration? You know this building's history better than anyone. Your input would be valuable." Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something that looked almost like gratitude. "I'd like that very much." We parted with a tentative handshake that felt like the beginning of something new. Not quite healing, not yet, but a step in that direction. As I drove away, my mind was already racing with plans for the building's transformation. I'd need specialists in historical restoration, craftspeople who understood Art Deco details, researchers to ensure authenticity in every element. But first, I needed to share this with someone who would truly understand what it meant to me. I pulled over and called my mother. "Natalie, what a lovely surprise," she answered, her voice warm across the miles that separated us. "Mom, I just toured Grandfather's bank building with Dad," I said without preamble. "I'm going to buy it and restore it." There was a moment of silence, then a soft laugh. "Oh, sweetheart, your grandfather would be over the moon. He always said that building had the best bones in Seattle." "You never told me he was interested in architecture and development," I said. a question in my voice. I didn't realize it mattered to you until you were already pursuing it yourself, she replied. But yes, he was passionate about it. He used to say that bankers only moved money around, but builders created something that outlasted them. The echo of my own thoughts was startling. Dad showed me the archives in the vault. Letters, blueprints, photographs, everything. And he's offered to consult on the restoration. Another pause. He did? The surprise in her voice mirrored my own earlier reaction. That's unexpected. I think he's changing, Mom. Or maybe I am. Or both of us. Growth happens when you least expect it, she said wisely. Speaking of which, how's that penthouse treating you? Still enjoying the view? I laughed. It's perfect, though I'm thinking of adding a proper home office now that I'll be working on this new project. Send pictures when you do, she said. And of the bank building, too. I want to see it come back to life. After hanging up, I sat in my car for a moment, feeling a strange sense of alignment, as if pieces of my life that had seemed disparate were suddenly revealing their connections. My grandfather's passion for buildings, my father's unexpected role as preserver of that legacy, my own instinctive drive toward creation and restoration. Perhaps my path hadn't been a rebellion after all, but a return, a circling back to something in my blood, something I'd inherited without knowing it. The following weeks were a blur of activity. Inspections confirmed what I'd already sensed. The building was structurally sound beneath its outdated systems and unfortunate cosmetic changes. My offer was accepted, the paperwork processed, and suddenly I was the owner of my grandfather's legacy. I assembled a team of historical preservation experts, architectural specialists, and craftspeople skilled in restoration techniques. Together, we pored over the archives, studying the original designs and photographs to ensure accuracy in every detail we restored. My father proved to be an invaluable resource, his memory filling gaps that the documentation couldn't. He remembered which office had housed which executive, the color of the original carpeting, the specific wood used for the teller counters. More surprisingly, he remembered the people, the head teller who always had candy for children visiting with their parents, the security guard who had served in World War II and walked with a slight limp, the maintenance man who knew every inch of the building's systems. These stories brought the building to life for me in ways the blueprints couldn't. I began to see it not just as an architectural treasure, but as a place where lives had intersected, where careers had been built, where Seattle's history had unfolded one transaction at a time. 3 months into the restoration process, I invited my father to view our progress. We stood in the partially restored lobby, where craftspeople were carefully reconstructing damaged plasterwork and polishing the original marble floors. We found the original chandelier crystals in storage, I told him, pointing upward where the magnificent fixture now gleamed, newly rewired but historically intact. And look at this. I led him to a section of wall where workers had carefully removed the 1970s paneling to reveal the original marble beneath. The veining in the stone created a pattern that seemed to flow across the wall like water. I'd forgotten how beautiful it was, he said softly, running his hand over the smooth surface. Your grandfather imported this from Italy. The quarry doesn't exist anymore. We're documenting everything, I assured him, creating a comprehensive record of the restoration process to add to the archives. Future generations will know exactly what was original, what was restored, and how it was done. He nodded approvingly. You're thinking long-term. Good. I learned that from you, actually, I admitted. All those lectures about sustainable business practices and looking beyond immediate profit, they sank in, even when I was pretending not to listen. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. And here I thought you'd tuned out everything I ever said. Not everything. Just the parts about law school and practical careers. He laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound I hadn't heard from him in years. Fair enough. We continued our tour, discussing plans for each floor. The ground level would house a boutique bank branch, a nod to the building's origins, plus a cafe in what had once been the safe deposit box room. Upper floors would offer professional offices designed to attract creative firms and startups who valued character over cookie-cutter spaces. And the top floor? He asked as we rode the newly restored elevator upward. Event space, I replied, for everything from corporate functions to weddings. We're restoring your father's office as a private dining room for smaller gatherings. And the roof. The elevator doors opened onto what had once been executive offices and was now a construction zone. Workers were carefully removing dropped ceilings to reveal the original height of the rooms, while others were stripping decades of paint from window frames to expose the original mahogany beneath. The roof will be a garden terrace, I continued as we made our way through the space. Open to the public during certain hours, with views of the city and the mountain. We're installing a small bar and performance area for summer jazz concerts, a tribute to those parties you told me about. My father stopped walking and turned to face me. You're not just preserving the building, he said. You're bringing back its spirit. That's the goal, I acknowledged. Anyone can restore the physical elements. The challenge is capturing the essence, the feeling people had when they walked through these doors. He was quiet for a moment, looking around at the space that was simultaneously being deconstructed and reborn. I never told you why I fought so hard against your real estate ambitions, he said finally. I waited, uncertain where this was heading. When your grandfather sold the bank, it nearly broke him, he continued. Not financially, the sale made him wealthy, but emotionally. He'd put everything into this building, into the institution it housed. And when the new owners began making changes, removing his name, altering his vision, I watched something in him die. I'd never heard this story before. What happened? He retreated. Stopped going downtown altogether, because he couldn't bear to see what they'd done to his life's work. I swore I'd never let myself become that attached to something so vulnerable to other people's decisions. He met my eyes directly. I didn't want that pain for you, Natalie. The revelation stunned me. All those years I'd thought his opposition came from dismissal of my abilities, from rigid ideas about appropriate careers for women, from his own need to control my path. I'd never considered that it might have stemmed from a place of protection, however misguided. Real estate isn't just about buildings, Dad, I said gently. It's about vision, about creating spaces where people can live and work and connect. Yes, there's risk. Yes, there's vulnerability. But without that, what's the point? He nodded slowly. Your grandfather used to say something similar. That buildings were really about the people who used them, not the materials they were made from. Exactly. I smiled, feeling a connection to a man I'd barely known but whose blood and perspective apparently ran strong in me. And speaking of people, I have a proposition for you. He raised an eyebrow questioningly. When the restoration is complete, the top floor will need a manager, someone who knows the building's history, who understands its significance, who can share its stories with visitors. I took a breath. I think you'd be perfect for the role, if you're interested. His expression shifted from surprise to thoughtfulness. You want me to work for you? With me, I corrected. As a consultant and historian. Part-time, flexible hours. You mentioned retirement was leaving you at loose ends. This would be a purpose, a connection to something meaningful. He didn't answer immediately, and I resisted the urge to fill the silence with more persuasion. Finally he spoke. I'd need an office, the one with the eastern view preferably. A hint of a smile played at his lips. And creative input on the historical displays. Done and done, I agreed, extending my hand formally. Welcome to Rhodes Heritage Development, Dad. He took my hand, his grip firm and certain. I look forward to working together, Ms. Rhodes. As we continued our tour of the building that was becoming a bridge between our separate worlds, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't known I was seeking. The path that had seemed like a rejection of my father's values had led me unexpectedly back to common ground. Not through surrender or compromise, but through excellence. Through proving that my way, though different from his, held its own validity, its own integrity, its own success. From my penthouse above his apartment to this shared project, honoring our family legacy, we had traveled a long and complicated road. The journey wasn't over. There would be disagreements ahead, old patterns to navigate, new boundaries to establish. But, for the first time, I could see the possibility of a relationship built on mutual respect rather than expectation and disappointment. As we stood together on the rooftop, surveying the city that had shaped both our lives in such different ways, I realized that sometimes the greatest renovation project isn't a building at all. It's the careful, patient restoration of connections we thought were beyond repair, revealing beneath the layers of hurt and misunderstanding the original blueprint of love that had been there all along. 1 year later, I stood in the center of the restored lobby, watching as staff made final preparations for the grand opening. Tomorrow, my grandfather's building would begin its new life, reborn as the Rhodes, a mixed-use landmark that honored its past while embracing the future. The massive chandelier sparkled overhead, casting prismatic light across the polished marble floors. Every detail, from the restored bronze elevator doors to the recreated teller counters, now repurposed as a concierge desk, reflected our commitment to historical accuracy balanced with modern function. "Ms. Rhodes?" My assistant approached, tablet in hand. "The caterers need your approval on the final layout for tomorrow's reception." I nodded, following her toward the rear of the lobby where tables were being arranged. The transformation from neglected building to vibrant urban hub had been challenging, exhilarating, and occasionally overwhelming. There had been unexpected structural issues hidden behind walls, battles with the city's historical preservation board over modernization requirements, and the constant pressure of budget constraints. But standing here now, seeing the vision realized, every struggle seemed worthwhile. "Natalie!" My father's voice called from across the lobby. He walked toward me with a confidence I hadn't seen in years, greeting staff members by name as he passed. His role as historical consultant had evolved into something more substantial. He'd become the building's unofficial ambassador, conducting tours for potential tenants, sharing stories of its past, and surprisingly, developing genuine relationships with the younger architects and designers on our team. "The mayor's office just confirmed," he said as he reached me. "She'll be here for the ribbon cutting, along with the head of the Historical Society and 3 city council members." "Perfect," I replied. "And the exhibit upstairs?" "Installed this morning. Come see." His pride was evident as he led me toward the elevator. The top floor now housed a permanent exhibition, chronicling the building's history, created from the archives we'd discovered in the vault. Photographs, architectural drawings, and artifacts told the story not just of the structure itself, but of its place in Seattle's development. The centerpiece was a beautifully restored desk, my grandfather's, displayed with his original banker's lamp and leather chair. "We just added this," my father said, directing me to a newly installed display case. Inside was a framed newspaper article from last month's business journal, "Rhodes Brings Family Legacy Full Circle." The photo showed 3 generations, my grandfather in an old photograph, my father and me, standing on the building's roof terrace during the restoration. "It's perfect," I said softly, touched by his thoughtfulness in adding this final piece to the historical narrative. "There's something else I want to show you," he replied, leading me through the exhibition space to what had once been my grandfather's private office. The room had been meticulously restored, from the wood paneling to the built-in bookshelves. The hidden wet bar remained, now stocked with top-shelf spirits for the private events that would be held here. But something new had been added. A wall of photographs I hadn't seen before, showing the building through different eras. "Where did these come from?" I asked, studying images of the lobby filled with customers in 1940s attire, the roof gardens set up for a summer party in the 1950s, my grandfather cutting a ribbon at what appeared to be a branch opening. "Your grandmother's attic," he explained. I remembered she had kept albums separate from the official bank archives. "Your mother helped me track them down." One photo in particular caught my eye. My grandfather standing proudly with a small girl perched on his shoulders. The child, about 5 years old, was pointing excitedly at the building's facade. "Is that me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The memory surfaced. A rare day when both my parents were busy, and my grandfather had taken me downtown. He'd bought me ice cream and shown me his building, explaining how the stonecutters had carved each geometric pattern by hand. "You were fascinated by the details," my father said, watching my face as the memory crystallized. "You kept asking how they made the stone look like that. Your grandfather said you had the eye of an architect." "I don't remember that part," I admitted. "He told me later. Said you'd inherited his appreciation for good design." My father shook his head slightly. "I should have paid attention to that observation. It might have saved us both years of conflict." I touched the photograph gently. "We can't change the past, but we've done something better. We've honored it while creating something new." A knock at the door interrupted our moment. The head architect entered, looking apologetic. "Sorry to intrude, but we have a small issue with the rooftop lighting installation. The historical fixtures we restored aren't compatible with the new control system." "I'll come take a look," I said, giving my father's arm a quick squeeze before following the architect out. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of last-minute adjustments, final inspections, and coordination with the event staff. By the time I returned to my penthouse to change for the opening reception, exhaustion competed with exhilaration. I stood in my closet, contemplating what to wear for this momentous occasion. My hand hesitated between outfits before selecting a tailored jumpsuit in deep emerald. Professional yet distinctive, a statement piece that reflected confidence without ostentation. As I dressed, I thought about how far I'd come from that determined young woman who had stretched herself to the breaking point to buy her first dilapidated duplex. The journey hadn't been a straight line. There had been failures along with successes, moments of doubt alongside triumphs. The roads project itself had nearly derailed 6 months in, when we discovered serious foundation issues that threatened to blow the budget beyond sustainability. I'd spent 3 sleepless nights running numbers, restructuring financing, and ultimately making the difficult decision to sell 2 of my smaller properties to ensure this one could be completed properly. Worth every sacrifice, I thought, as I fastened a simple gold pendant around my neck. My grandmother's, sent by my mother for this special occasion. The building wasn't just another asset in my portfolio. It represented something deeper. A connection to my past, a bridge to my father, and most importantly, a contribution to the city I loved that would outlast me. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. "Car waiting downstairs." "The woman of the hour!" Heads turned, and spontaneous applause broke out. I felt a blush rise to my cheeks as I made my way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about various aspects of the project. In one corner, my father was holding court, describing to an enraptured group of young professionals how the original vault door had been preserved and repurposed as the entrance to what was now a high-tech conference center. The mayor arrived, accompanied by her entourage and several news crews. "Natalie Rhodes," she said warmly, shaking my hand as cameras flashed around us. "You've given Seattle back a treasure we didn't even know we were missing. This kind of visionary preservation sets a standard for development in our city." "Thank you, Mayor," I replied. But it was truly a team effort. And a family one. I gestured toward my father, who approached to join the conversation. "David Rhodes," the mayor greeted him. "I understand you were instrumental in preserving the historical accuracy of the restoration." "I merely provided context," he said modestly. "My daughter is the visionary behind this project. I'm just fortunate she allowed me to be part of it." The sincerity in his voice caught me by surprise. Our relationship had improved dramatically over the past year. But public acknowledgement of my leadership was new territory. After the official ribbon-cutting ceremony and speeches, guests were invited to tour the building. I found a moment of quiet in the small garden terrace we'd created off the second floor. A peaceful oasis in the midst of the celebration. There you are. My father's voice came from the doorway. Hiding from your admirers? I smiled. Just taking a breath. It's a lot to take in. He joined me at the railing, where delicate string lights illuminated the miniature landscape of ornamental trees and architectural plantings. Your grandfather would have loved this space. He always said buildings needed green elements to soften the stone and steel. Another trait I apparently inherited without knowing it, I said, gesturing to the living wall I'd insisted on incorporating into the design. I've always been drawn to that balance between structure and nature. My father nodded thoughtfully. You know, I've been thinking about something your mother said recently. She told me that when you were little, you used to build elaborate structures with your blocks, then surround them with your toy animals and little paper trees. You'd get upset if anyone moved either element, the building, or its environment. They had to exist together in your world. The memory returned in a flash. My childhood determination that buildings belonged in harmony with their surroundings, not imposed upon them. I'd forgotten that, I admitted. I should have paid more attention, he said quietly, to who you actually were, not who I thought you should be. Dad, I began, but he held up a hand. Please, let me say this. I was wrong, Natalie, not just about your capabilities, but about my approach to parenting. I tried to force you into a mold instead of recognizing your unique strengths. He looked out over the garden, then back to me. The irony is that you've achieved exactly what I always claimed to want for you: security, respect, success, but on your own terms, not mine. I couldn't have done this without you, I said, gesturing to the building around us. Not just the practical help this past year, but the foundation you gave me, the attention to detail, the insistence on doing things properly, the focus on long-term value over quick profit. Those are your values, Dad. I just applied them differently. He smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. Perhaps we're more alike than either of us realized. A comfortable silence fell between us, broken only by the distant sounds of the party continuing inside. Finally, he spoke again. I've been offered a position on the Historical Preservation Board, he said. They were impressed by my work on this project. It would be part-time, advisory mostly, but meaningful. That's wonderful, I said sincerely. They'd be lucky to have your expertise. There's more, he continued. I've decided to sell my apartment. I looked at him in surprise. Oh, where will you go? That's what I wanted to discuss with you. He seemed uncharacteristically uncertain. The brownstone. After years of distance, both emotional and physical, he was literally moving closer. I think that would be perfect, I said. And actually, the commercial space on the ground floor of that building is still available. It might make an excellent location for a certain historical consulting firm if you were interested in formalizing that side of your new career. His eyes lit up with interest. You think there's a market for that? I know there is, I assured him. Every month, I get calls from developers working on historical properties who need exactly your kind of knowledge. You could build something meaningful, a resource that helps preserve Seattle's architectural heritage beyond just this one building. For a moment, he looked like the ambitious young lawyer I remembered from childhood, eager, energized by possibility. I'd need help setting it up, navigating the business side. That, I said with a smile, is something I know a bit about. Partners? I extended my hand formally. He took it, his grip firm and certain. Partners. The moment was interrupted by my assistant appearing at the terrace entrance. Ms. Rhodes, they're ready for your closing remarks downstairs. As we made our way back to the main event, I felt a sense of completion that went beyond the successful restoration of a building. Something else had been restored this year, something I had given up hope of ever recovering. My speech was brief but heartfelt, thanking the teams who had made the project possible and acknowledging the building's significance to both the city and my family. As applause filled the magnificently restored lobby, I caught my father's eye across the crowd. His nod of approval, not grudging or qualified but wholehearted, meant more than all the accolades from city officials and business leaders combined. Later that night, after the last guests had departed and only the cleanup crew remained, I took a private moment to visit my grandfather's restored office on the top floor. The room was peaceful in the late-hour quiet, the city lights visible through the large windows. I sat briefly in his chair, running my hands along the smooth wood of the desk that had witnessed so much of Seattle's business history. On the wall hung a new addition to the historical display, a modern architectural rendering of the roads, as it appeared now, beautifully restored and reimagined. Beside it was a photograph from the 1930s showing the building on its opening day. "We did it, grandfather," I said softly to the empty room. "We brought it back." As I prepared to leave, I noticed something on the desk, a small wooden box I didn't recognize. Inside was a set of keys and a note in my father's handwriting. "For the next generation to preserve and reimagine." With pride and confidence. Dad. The keys, I realized, were to the brownstone he planned to purchase, a gesture of trust and continuity that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, looking out over the city I had helped reshape. The roads had quickly become a landmark again, its ground-floor cafe and bank branch bustling with activity, its office spaces fully leased to creative firms and startups, its event spaces booked solid for months ahead. My father's historical consulting firm, Rhodes Heritage Advisors, occupied a beautifully appointed office in the brownstone next to my headquarters, and had already secured contracts with 3 major development companies. More importantly, our weekly strategy lunches had become a highlight for both of us, opportunities to share insights, challenge each other's thinking, and gradually rebuild the relationship we'd lost. Sometimes we disagreed, sometimes passionately, but now those disagreements were based on ideas, not disappointment or rebellion. We had found a way to respect our differences while valuing our connections. My phone buzzed with a notification, a reminder of tomorrow's meeting with the City Planning Commission. I was presenting a proposal for a new project, an innovative mixed-income housing development that would transform an abandoned industrial site into a vibrant community. The plans incorporated green spaces, local business incubators, and artistic elements that celebrated the neighborhood's cultural heritage. My father had reviewed the proposal last week, offering valuable insights on historical context and community integration. "This is your best work yet," he'd said after studying the plans. "You're not just developing property, you're developing possibilities." The phrase had stayed with me, crystallizing what I had always felt but struggled to articulate about my approach to real estate. I wasn't just in the business of buildings. I was in the business of potential, of seeing what could be, not just what was, of transformation that honored the past while creating space for the future. As twilight settled over Seattle, I could see the lights coming on in the roads, its Art Deco silhouette standing proud among newer, sleeker towers. In its restored grandeur, it was neither stuck in the past nor erased by the present. It was a bridge between eras, a testament to the value of preservation and reinvention. Much like the relationship my father and I had rebuilt, not returning to what was, but creating something new that honored our shared history while making space for who we had become. When I'd started this journey, proving my father wrong had been a driving force, showing him that I could succeed in a field he said wasn't for people like us. But somewhere along the way, that motivation had transformed into something more meaningful, proving myself right. Validating not my abilities to him, but my vision to myself. The legacy my grandfather began, that my father preserved, and that I had now extended, wasn't just about buildings or businesses. It was about seeing potential, where others saw only obstacles. About having the courage to invest in possibilities. About understanding that the most valuable developments aren't made of concrete and steel, but of vision and determination. From my penthouse above my father's former apartment to our shared stewardship of my grandfather's building, we had come full circle, not ending where we began, but spiraling upward to a new level of understanding and respect. The city lights twinkled below, each one representing a home, a business, a life unfolding within the structures that shaped Seattle's skyline. Among them were buildings I had transformed, not just physically but functionally, turning neglected spaces into communities, converting outdated structures into hubs of innovation and creativity. This was my true inheritance, not property or wealth, but the ability to see beyond what is to what could be. To transform not just buildings, but relationships, expectations, and narratives. To build not just with bricks and mortar, but with vision and values. To anyone who's ever been told, "That's not for people like you," whether about a career, a dream, or a relationship, remember this: the most powerful response isn't anger or argument. It's excellence. It's building something so undeniably valuable that it changes not just your own narrative, but the very definition of what's possible for people like you. Sometimes the greatest